r/nosleep. Hosted by you/Carl1961. Hide and Seek. Part 1. I awoke to the sound of people talking. I opened my eyes, blinking once or twice to clear the film of sleep from my vision. I blinked a third time, confused. I sat up, looking around, my confusion giving way to total bewilderment. I wasn't in my bed. I wasn't in my room. I wasn't even in my house. I was lying on a hard wooden floor in a place I didn't recognize. For a few seconds I was too disoriented, too shocked, to even begin to mentally process my new environment. Gradually I registered that I wasn't alone. I could hear voices. I had been hearing them all along, but before they had just been meaningless background noise. Now I became consciously aware of them. I could see there were other people here with me, wherever here was. 2 young women and a man were huddled together in one corner of the large room I was sitting in, talking amongst themselves in low, urgent whispers. In a different corner, another young woman was pacing anxiously back and forth, muttering something to herself. A second man was sitting in a chair by a large stone fireplace, his head lowered, his hands rubbing his temples distractedly. Directly across from me a third man was standing with his back to me, peering intently out a darkened window. About 10 feet away from him, a fourth woman was standing in front of a door, tugging uselessly at its handle. "Hey," I said loudly to get their attention. They all spun in my direction, startled. They all looked like they were around my age, early to mid-20s, and they were all strangers. I had never seen any of them before in my life. "Jesus," the young woman who had been pacing said, jumping back a step. "You're awake," the young man who had been looking out the window said. "Thank God. We were starting to think you'd never wake up." "What the fuck's going on?" I demanded, eyeing the 7 strangers suspiciously. "Where am I? Who are you people?" "Here we go again," the man sitting by the fireplace muttered. The man who had been standing by the window took a step in my direction. "Listen," he began, "just stay calm and..." I jumped to my feet, clenching my fists, taking a defensive stance. "Stay the fuck away from me," I yelled at him. I darted my eyes around the room. "All of you. Stay away from me. I want someone to start talking. Tell me what's going on." "We don't know," the woman who had been pulling on the door said. "We've been asking the same questions ourselves." "Listen to me," the man by the window said, "you went to bed in your house, everything was perfectly normal, you fell asleep, and you woke up here, right?" I eyed him, still distrustful. "Yeah. Same here. Same with all of us. We just woke up here, one at a time. We don't know how we got here and we don't even know where we are." He pointed around the room, starting with the woman standing by the door. "This is Audrey." He pointed to the man sitting by the fireplace. "That's Paul." He pointed to the woman who had been pacing. "That's Zoe." He pointed to the 2 women and the man still standing together in the corner. "That's Warren, Jessica, and Katie." Lastly he pointed to himself. "And I'm Keith. What's your name?" "Mike," I said, untensing a little. I looked around, scrutinizing our surroundings more closely. We appeared to be inside a rustic log cabin. There was a couch, a table and some chairs, a small kitchenette, and that was about it. I looked out the window but saw only darkness. It was still night outside. I turned my attention back to my new companions. "Do any of you know each other?" "No, Paul," the guy sitting in the chair replied, "none of us have ever met before." "And none of you recognize this place?" I asked, looking around. They all shook their heads. "What the fuck are we doing here?" I wondered aloud. "Someone must have kidnapped us," Warren said. "Like who?" I asked. He shrugged. "Someone with a sick sense of humor. Or some psycho. Why would they bring us here?" "I don't think I want to know," Zoe said quietly, and shuddered. "Yeah, this is some jigsaw type shit," Paul muttered. "We need to get the fuck out of here before whoever did this comes back," I said. "No shit, Sherlock," the woman by the door, Audrey told me dryly. "You think we haven't already tried?" "The door's locked, then?" I asked her. "Yep. And none of the windows open." "Well, let's just break one of the fuckers," I suggested. "We tried that, too," Keith replied. "Look." He picked up a chair and swung it at the window next to him. The chair splintered, but the glass remained intact. "Must be shatterproof or something." "Fuck," I snapped. I was seriously getting scared now. I frantically rifled through my pockets, but they were empty. "Dumb question, guys, but do any of you have a phone?" "Why, you want to order a pizza?" Paul grumbled sarcastically. "No phones," Keith said, ignoring him. We've been through all this before. And there's none in the cabin, either. We already looked. We must be on someone's shit list for them to go to all this trouble, I said. Hey, I don't know about you, but I don't have any enemies. Paul retorted. Same here, Katie seconded. Yeah, my ex-boyfriend's nuts, but not this nuts, Audrey said. My ex probably is that nuts, but he's not smart enough to pull off something like this, Zoe added. Keith looked at me. What about you? I thought about it. I shook my head. I've never been close enough to anyone to make friends, let alone enemies. Maybe it's terrorists or some shadowy government organization performing some kind of psychological experiment, Jessica theorized. That's the dumbest fucking thing I ever heard, Paul snapped. Fuck you. You have a better idea? She shot back. Knock it off, both of you, Keith shouted. None of this is helping. It doesn't matter who did this or why, the point is we're here and we've got to deal with it. We were all quiet for a few moments. I think what we should do. Audrey began, then stopped abruptly, tensing. Listen. She pressed her ear against the door. Someone's coming. I hear footsteps. Oh shit, Warren said, alarmed. Everyone get back, away from the door. Keith ordered. We all quickly backed away, our eyes locked fearfully on the door to the cabin. I could hear them now too, heavy footsteps approaching slowly in a calm yet purposeful stride. My heart was pounding. I was absolutely terrified. I waited, tense, as the footsteps stopped on the other side of the door. Then the knob turned and the door slowly opened. It was only much later, after it was long over, that I had a chance to reflect upon these events, and only then did I realize that I never heard the sound of the door being unlocked. A man stood in the doorway. A man I had never seen before in my life. He was tall and broad-shouldered and powerfully built, like a football player. He looked to be around the same age as the rest of us. He was dressed in a plaid LL Bean style shirt, khaki pants and hiking boots, like an outdoorsman or a lumberjack. He had a backpack on his shoulders. What startled me the most about him was how absolutely handsome he was. A full head of curly golden blonde hair, the chiseled features of a model, and the most intense, mesmerizing blue eyes I have ever seen. I'm not gay, but on some basic level, I found myself involuntarily attracted to him. He was beautiful. He looked around the room, regarding the 8 of us calmly, almost serenely. He smiled at us with full, ruby red lips that transformed his face and gave it a cherubic quality. It was almost a gentle, even friendly smile, but it didn't touch his eyes. Those intense blue eyes that seemed to gleam with malevolent glee and unholy excitement. It was unnerving how that gentle smile clashed with his evil eyes. It terrified me. Good, he exclaimed, you're all awake. Welcome, everyone. Now we can get started. His voice, it was strange. He didn't look any older than 26 at the most, but his voice belonged to a much older man. The dry, cultured voice of a man in his 50s or 60s. For a moment we were all speechless. Then Warren found his voice. Who are you? He demanded. Where are we? Why did you bring us here? What do you want? The stranger rolled his eyes in good-natured annoyance, smirking in amusement. Always the same tiresome questions. Every time I bring some new friends together to play. Play? Katie said, what are you talking about? Oh yes, perhaps some explaining is in order. You see, my lovely new friends, I have lived a long and often quite lonely existence. And it has also been a rather boring existence. So every once in a while I gather together a group such as yourselves to assist me in breaking the tedium. Oh, we are going to have such a wonderful time together. I have such an exciting game in store for us to play. A nice game of hide and seek. I looked at him, utterly baffled. This guy was a total lunatic. You brought us here to play hide and seek with you? Paul said in disbelief and fury. You're fucking insane, dude. Let me explain the rules, the stranger went on, ignoring Paul. I will give you a head start of 5 minutes to leave the cabin and find a hiding place out in the woods. Do not attempt to escape the woods. I have taken measures to ensure that that is an impossibility. You may stay together as a group or break up to hide individually, which I actually would prefer since it would present more of a challenge and make the game last longer. After 5 minutes have passed, I will come to find you. And the last person I find is the winner. He grinned at us, displaying perfectly white, even teeth. And shall be awarded with their life. What do you mean? Zoe demanded fearfully. Well, I think it's quite self-explanatory, but perhaps some of you are a bit denser than the rest. I mean, I'm going to kill the 7 of you who don't win. Fuck you, you fucking psycho, Paul shouted at him and stepped towards him defiantly, fists clenched. There's 8 of us and only 1 of you. What makes you think you can get us to go along with your sick little plan? The stranger frowned at Paul, narrowing his eyes. His voice was cool, with an edge of threat. Mr. Reynolds, you are speaking to me out of bounds. I suggest you calm down before you make me lose my temper. Or what? Paul challenged him, not backing down. What the fuck are you going to do about it? Paul, shut the fuck up and do what he says. Keith told him, alarmed. He might have a gun. We can take him. Paul turned to look at the rest of us. Come on you guys. We outnumber him. We can. The stranger moved faster than a bolt of lightning. Faster than humanly possible. In a flash, he had grabbed Paul and hoisted him into the air by his neck, holding him 3 feet off the ground in one hand without any discernible effort, as if he was holding nothing more than an empty cardboard box. Before any of us could react, he drove his free hand into Paul's crotch. His fist tore through Paul's jeans and plunged into his groin with a sickening wet sound of ripping flesh. In the same lightning-fast motion, he yanked his hand out of the hole in Paul's crotch. His hand was covered in blood and clutching something. Paul emitted a high-pitched, almost comically feminine shriek of total agony. His eyes bulged from their sockets and his dangling feet kicked mindlessly at the air. The stranger released his grip on Paul's neck and he dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, spasming in pain and moaning. This all happened in less than 3 seconds. The stranger unclenched his bloody hand and something dropped to the floor with a wet double thud, Paul's testicles. We were all too stunned and horrified to even scream. The stranger sighed, his face composed and zen-like. He looked down at the writhing figure on the ground before him and shook his head in regret. It's always like this, he said softly. There's always at least one of you that has to be difficult. I always have to make an example of that person to the rest of you. It's a shame, I was hoping that just this once I would have a full complement of friends to play the game, but there are still 7 of you. I suppose I can't complain. He suddenly raised his foot and slammed one heavy hiking boot down on Paul's neck with monstrous force that caused the whole floor to shudder. There was a crack. And Paul stopped writhing and lay motionless, his eyes still bulging and his mouth gaping open. His head was cocked at a grotesque, unnatural angle. I couldn't take my eyes off Paul's corpse. My brain felt frozen. I couldn't seem to analyze or make sense of what I had just witnessed. Behind me I heard one of the women, I don't know which, begin to sob. Someone else, it might have been Katie, said oh my God in a drawn-out, anguished moan. Well, the stranger said brightly, looking back to us and addressing us with a hideously cheerful smile, now that unfortunate business with Mr. Reynolds is finished, we can begin. I trust I don't have to repeat the rules to you. I'm going to close my eyes and count down from 300, and when I finish, the fun can commence. I suggest you all get busy finding a good hiding place outside. Remember, don't try to leave the woods. Good luck to you all. Now let's get started. He closed his eyes and began counting out loud. 300, 299, 298. For a few seconds none of us moved. I think we were all still in shock. We stood there motionless like statues as this murderous madman stood in the middle of the room, slowly counting down to 0. I was the one to break the tableau. My survival instincts kicked in and without a look back at my 6 remaining companions, I darted across the cabin, dodging around the stranger and lunging through the open doorway behind him. I heard the others following my example, their feet stampeding across the floor behind me, some of them shouting in panic. I paused only for a second outside to get my bearings. It was a clear summer night and the only light outside the cabin came from the full moon shining overhead. The cabin stood in a clearing surrounded by thick woods on all sides. There were no other buildings or vehicles of any kind in sight. Then I took off running at top speed through the towering trees, as far away from the cabin as I could get.